Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Chariwag, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I am coordinating the paper on Sociology of Gender. Today we are going to discuss the module Feminist Epistemology and Methodology. In this module, first we will deal with the question of what is epistemology and methodology. Further, we will deal with the relationship of epistemology with methodology, especially in the context of science and social sciences. Further, we will delve into the feminist critique of androcentrism and mainstream methodology. And finally, we will discuss feminist approaches to producing knowledge. Epistemology and methodology in science and social sciences. Before embarking on a feminist critique of mainstream epistemology and methodology, it is important to understand the tenets of what they are critiquing. Mainstream epistemology and methodology is based on natural science. Natural scientists view the world as a given, something that is out there for researchers to discover and uncover and represent. Propose a positivist method of doing research. Life scientists and social scientists follow similar worldview and hence attempt at carrying out research in a scientific manner to obtain results which are accurate to the reality that they seek to study. Since it is assumed that the reality is out there, it is also assumed that no matter who goes to study that reality, the results will be the same. Mainstream science has always had a positivist orientation. Positivism champions the goals of objectivity and value neutrality in research. The discovery of the really real needs to be necessarily objective, without the subjectivity of the researcher seeping into the process. Therefore, objectivity and context neutrality are valued as essential assets of positivism. It is assumed that an objective and a neutral researcher with a set of quantitative tools will be able to discover the measurable facets of reality that exists out there. If the researcher does not effectively use the tools of research, for instance a questionnaire or a test, then the research may get biased. Certain safety measures are introduced in the scientific methods in order to safeguard against biases that may creep into the research process. A theory that emerges as a result of the following the positivist method must also withstand the test of validity and reliability. The positivist quest for quantifiable and objective reality is combined with empirical observations in order to discover and verify causal laws that can be used to predict human behavior. The discovery of causal laws is based on the research on a sample's population that is then generalized for a larger population. The patterns that emerge in the causal law enable the researcher to argue for the theory's capacity to predict social behavior of a population group. Thus, generalizability and predictability are features of a good scientific theory. It is evident that positivism follows a process of carrying out research which is divided into neat units without any scope for overlap or ambiguity. As mentioned earlier, this emerges from a certain understanding of reality, what is worthy of being known and who is capable of being the knower. Positivism has already been established as a valid way of establishing the methodology of scientific research. One can find the roots of this methodology in the epistemological position that scientific research assumes. The ability to know the reality is bestowed in the hands of the objective knower, who will be able to cut the reality at its joints and present a logical view of the world. Therefore, all that is not considered to be objective and all that is not measurable so that it can be generalized is deemed to be outside the scope of science. In this way, science determines its scope and limits. The knower is expected to work within the dualistic laws of thought to be able to present a rational and objective picture of the reality. Greater the attainment of conceptual order or consistency, the closer one is to the truth. In order to maintain this conceptual order, there is a need for ordered principles. Consequently, emotions and lived experiences that are not quantifiable and are not strictly within the realm of rational are considered to be pollutants of a good methodology. Feminists have critiqued scientific epistemology and methodology's emphasis on rationality, logic, reality of a specific kind to arrive at a truth. Arguably, the mainstream privileges the experiences of men and positions them at the center of the theory construction. The lived experiences of women that are often different are placed at the margins of mainstream theory. A theory that has a male bias is also known as androcentric theory. The next section will discuss feminist critiques of mainstream methodology and androcentrism. Section 2, feminist critiques of androcentrism and mainstream methodology. There is no one feminist position. Feminists are committed to pluralism across the board after the advent of third world feminism. Feminist positions on knowledge production emerge from a premise of how they view the world, reality. In other words, the epistemological position. As opposed to mainstream positivist ways of looking at the world, that is reality, discussed in the previous section, feminist researchers do not subscribe to an ordered and quantifiable way of looking at the world. They question the positivist approach and raise epistemological questions like who can produce knowledge, how knowledge is or can be obtained, and what is knowledge. Feminist understanding of truth is different, and they believe that there are multiple ways of acquiring knowledge, and production of knowledge cannot be relegated to a set group of researchers. Feminist argues not only the core groups, marginalized groups of people also have the capacity to produce knowledge. According to Hesse Biber, positivists traditionally seek knowledge in a narrow self-contained way, whereas feminists aim at developing knowledge with their research subjects who bring in their own experiential knowledge, concerns, emotions to the project. Such an approach is debunked by the mainstream. In response, the feminists accuse mainstream scientific research of displaying an androcentric bias. In 1970s, feminists realized that the root cause of sexism is not in the immediate concrete social context, but at a deeper conceptual level. Concepts and conceptual schemes were identified as the hidden sources of sexism. Androcentrism, the perception of social life from a male point of view, with a consequent failure to accurately perceive or describe the activity of a woman, was seen as a root cause of everyday sexism faced by women. Androcentrism, therefore, is not only about masculinity but also about masculinity in a position of power. Feminists point out that male bias is different from androcentrism. This is because bias would lead to neutrality as a solution, which itself is contentious. Male bias is overt, but androcentrism is covert. Feminists point out that male bias is perpetuated under the garb of neutrality because feminists believe that no knowledge is value free. All knowledge emerges from the social location of the researcher, and therefore it is situated. Thus, subjectivity of both the researcher and the research participants need to be taken into consideration. They believe in the existence of an engaged, enmeshed knower and not the one who is detached. Stanley and Weiss argue that all knowledge necessarily results from the conditions of its production and is contextually located and irrevocably bears the marks of its origin in the minds and intellectual practices of those lay and professional theorists and researchers who give a voice to it. Feminists, therefore, do not see knowledge as representation. For them, all reality is constructed, and knowledge produced of such a reality depends on the researcher's social location and perception. Further, with regard to the critique of androcentrism, feminists argue that mainstream systems of knowledge have been designed in a way that women's lives and the social worlds are hidden from mainstream society. From the 1970s, feminists opposed such production of knowledge and argued that absence of women's voices was not the result of a natural process. Systems of knowledge are designed in such a way that they silence and devalue the voices of women, either through acts of omission, implying that women's voices and experiences are left out from the process of knowledge production by mistake, or acts of commission, through which women's voices and experiences are intentionally left out of the process of knowledge production. Moitra believes this to be an act of commission, points out that the exclusion of women's experiences is due to an androcentric bias which treats human as a neutered concept and on every occasion tries to replace woman by human. She also points out, due to the creation of these neutered human qualities, women's experiences which do not converge with ideas about human experiences are left out of theory construction on the pretext that they do not match the desired or aspired for human qualities. By rendering women's experiences unworthy of theory construction, they are left out of the process of knowledge construction and gradually silenced and marginalized. Scientific research, she observes, dehumanizes, objectifies, and refuses to accept the subjectivity of the person present. In the ordered world of scientific research, there is no apparent place for experiences that do not fall within the regimented understanding of human experience. Feminist scholars have pointed out that a rational, logical, and often teleological presentation of experience is considered appropriate for the purpose of knowledge creation within a positivist framework followed by scientific research. Women's experiences are often marginalized on the pretext that they are based on emotions and therefore irrational, inappropriate, and undesirable for theory. There is therefore no place for vagueness or ambiguity, emotion or pain. Evidence has to be factual and either true or false. It is assumed that it is the inability of the knower to fully understand the fact of the matter which allows ambiguity to creep into a proposed research. However, what can be an alternative way of looking at ambiguity is that it is omnipresent in all our lived experiences. Feminist theorizations reflect skepticism of the neatness that the science proposes, questioning the ways in which knowledge is organized. Critique of objectivity constitutes an important component of feminist critique of positivism. According to Mitra, feminist thought opposes the classical notion of objectivity. It either offers a revised version of objectivity or it rejects it altogether as a myth. The debate on objectivity emerges broadly between the supporters of the epistemological position of viewing the world as a context of independent standalone fact and the upholders of the view that the world is always known through the perspective of the knower. Positivists propound that the research process should be unbiased, objective, and hence neutral. However, there have been various discussions around the impossibility of a value-free research. To say that any research is completely value-free or free of assumptions is but an over-ambitious statement and expectation, as human activities can never be value-free. Humans need to be understood in the context of the social, political, and the historical context in which they are embedded. There is a continuum along which the various understandings of objectivity can be understood. Feminists themselves are greatly divided on the understanding of objectivity and its role in the process of knowledge production. Feminists reject the thesis that knowledge is autonomous and context neutral. They hold that knowledge is always situated in a gendered context. Their reasons for considering gender relevant for epistemology may often vary. This does not imply that they have given up on the commitment to objectivity. Feminists such as Helen Longino, Donna Haraway, and Sandra Harding wish to redefine objectivity and not to do away with it altogether. Harding proposes what she calls strong objectivity, which can be achieved if one rejects the idea of a neutral, value-free research. Also, she argues that there are some positions in the power hierarchy which do not benefit from power structures. If knowledge is constructed from such positions, it would ensure greater objectivity. Haraway proposes a doctrine of embodied objectivity that accommodates paradoxical and critical feminist science projects. Feminist objectivity means quite simply situated knowledges. Feminists such as Helen Longino, Donna Haraway, and Sandra Harding wish to redefine objectivity and not to do away with it altogether. Harding proposes what she calls strong objectivity, which can be achieved if one rejects the idea of a neutral, value-free research. Also, she argues that there are some positions in power hierarchy which do not benefit from power structures. If knowledge is constructed from such positions, it would ensure greater objectivity. Haraway proposes a doctrine of embodied objectivity that embodies paradoxical and critical feminist science projects. Feminist objectivity means quite simply situated knowledges. Based on these differing positions vis-a-vis objectivity, feminists propose different methodologies to ensure objectivity in research. Their methodology is guided by the critique of positivist understanding of reality, rationality, logic, truth, objectivity, and neutrality, which are perceived to be rooted in androcentrism. The following section will elucidate the different feminist approaches to methodology. Section 3. Feminist approaches to epistemology and methodology. Feminist research methodology emerged during the 1960s and 70s as a theoretical arm of women's movement that started in the West. Feminist research sought to transform women's lives as well as the world of academics. Feminism, like Marxism, believes in practice, that is, to not only to interpret the world but also to change it. Knowledge creating space, like most other spaces, has been male dominated. Male social scientists have created mainstream theoretical space and in the process they have systematically ignored women's lived experiences. However, since the emergence of feminism, a palpable pressure has been created on the demography of the academic space. As has been already pointed out, feminists challenge the process of knowledge production and point out that the knowledge produced by the mainstream is androcentric in nature. What is understood as knowledge is also male-centric in nature. For these reasons, women's knowledge has been understood as irrational, since male-centric theory dismissed it as gained out of intuition and not through accredited scientific tools of investigation. It was assumed that women cannot derive knowledge by the help of different means, and women cannot be an autonomous knower or knowledge seeker. Feminists perceive a hidden political agenda in this exclusion. A double standard is being maintained by the mainstream. On the one hand, they profess neutrality, on the other hand are wedded to convert gender bias. Feminist research, when it had a well-defined political motive. As has already been established, feminists understand knowledge as contextualized. They advocate a research process that is more attentive to power differentials and acknowledges the role of various social structures in not only the formulation of a research problem but also the ways in which the research is carried out. Therefore, drawing a link between epistemology, methodology and method. Feminist research, especially when a woman conducts it, has an emancipatory potential for both the researcher as well as the research. This is because a female researcher who is committed to highlighting the oppression of women in order to find ways to end it is not only sensitive to the prevalence of sexism and its repercussions in the lives of other women, but also in their own personal lives, where they are towing the lines of the norms and gender roles. Feminist research therefore contributes towards the process of liberation from inbuilt androcentric ways of thinking and being. In effect, feminist research projects have an element of exploration attached to them. Exploration here can be understood in terms of what Acker et al. Say, an open and critical process in which all intellectual tools we have inherited from a male-dominated intellectual tradition are brought into question, including ideas about the basic nature of human beings, the nature of social life, the taken for granted worldview of traditional science, what concepts and questions might help to illuminate our shared experience, condition, and how we should go about developing such knowledge. Describe this assumption, feminists are aware of the importance of reflexivity in research and how differences in women's social locations may impact research in different ways. Therefore, feminist scholars have noted research conducted within a feminist framework is attentive to the issues of difference, the questioning of social power, resistance to scientific oppression, and commitment to political activism and social justice. While feminist research brings into question not only the dominant intellectual tradition and the ways of doing research, it is also continuously reflexive about its own methods of doing research. The feminist researcher needs to be aware of the power differentials acting in the research processes and accordingly needs to transform the methodology. At times, there are no articulated boundaries of domination and resistance. In such cases, it becomes difficult for feminism to locate and identify points of contention. But feminist researchers need to be continuously conscious of the hierarchy and power relations that may be recreated in interactions with the oppressed or marginalized group with whom they seek to do research. Feminist contribution to epistemology has been twofold. One, to show that when it comes to knowledge, women get left out, and second, to show how when it comes to knowledge, women get hurt. There are two ways in which women get left out as subjects of knowledge. First, when, for instance, a discussion of labor does not take into consideration that unpaid labor carried out by women within the confines of home, or a medical research takes into consideration only male body as a prototype. Often the reason for this exclusion may be cast on women on the ground that they are unknowable. Second, women are left out because they fail to be knowers. There may be several reasons for it. Women may not have acquired the knowledge men have due to generations of exclusion from basic education. Therefore, barriers need to be removed for women to become knowers. Another reason could be that women are not even counted as knowers despite the exemplary work that they may be doing in their field of study. In that case, the barriers are not their access to knowledge but their credibility as knowers. Yet another perspective could be that women are left out as knowers because the mainstream conception of knowledge is flawed. Process of exclusion and objectification put together hurt women. Feminist empiricists such as Richmond Campbell and Janet Chaffetz argue that sexist androcentric biases may be removed as existing methodological norms are strictly adhered to. They propose an appropriate use of positivist method to further a feminist cause. Hence, they retain the idea of objectivity. They do not identify the role of power in the process of knowledge production and propose that the inclusion of more women as researchers and more research topics on women would help eliminate the bias. They would therefore resonate an old proverb, "Don't throw the baby with the bathwater," suggesting that there is no need to reject the idea of logic altogether. Instead, they believe in breaking the master's house with the master's tool. An inclusive methodology will address the issue of marginalization of women within the process of knowledge production. Feminist standpoint theorists like Sandra Harding, Nancy Hastock, Patricia Hill Collins look at social life from different vantage points from where it is experienced. They propose to start off thought and research from women's experiences, lives, and activities or labor, and from the emerging collective feminist discourses. It is believed that an insight into the lives of the marginalized would give an insight into the lives of the dominant as well. In order to develop strategies for resistance, the marginalized are considered as being aware of not only their own lives but also the lives of those who oppress them and their modes of oppression. Hesse Weber point out that by starting with lives of the marginalized people, standpoint theory not only critically examines the marginalized group as done in the past but also critically examines the lives of the dominant groups. It centers on the relationship between politics and knowledge. The basis of knowledge building from a standpoint epistemology lies in the politics of relationship between the dominant and the oppressed. To adopt a standpoint epistemology is not to make a claim that the standpoint of the person or the group is being studied is authentic. Rather, it implies that the standpoint of the person or a group needs to be included in the discourse not simplistically or uncritically, but in a way that brings out the power dynamics of the hierarchical structure of which the individual or group is a part. Moitra discusses that what differentiates a standpoint from the mainstream is not sex identity but power identity. Feminist standpoint theorists believe that women and other marginalized groups have been least corrupted by power. Therefore, their understanding of marginal lives as well as of the macro social order is likely to be more objective. Standpoint epistemology is used to get an understanding of the political and social positioning of a standpoint and the various ways in which women are marginalized or silenced. Stanley and Weiss trace the various modes and forms that form the standpoint epistemology may take place. They suggest that intersectionality is an important consideration while thinking about standpoint epistemology. They go on to discuss black feminist epistemology and lesbian feminist epistemology with the help of the works of Patricia Collins and Marlene Fry, and suggest that a range of feminist epistemology exists. They point out that what marks out, for example, a lesbian standpoint from the standpoint of a heterosexual woman is an explicit consciousness of oppression out of silencers, intrusions, and misnaming. They argue that we need to identify the differences that exist between women and understand that category of women needs deconstructing in order to focus on ontological separations as well as similarities. Postmodern feminist theorists put forth a challenge to the grand narratives and point out how power is constitutive of concepts and theories. They critique feminist empiricists and standpoint theorists on the ground of adopting an essentialist framework in the way the category of woman is used. For postmodern feminists, the question lies beyond the inclusion of subjects or objects in research and focuses on the constitution of the subject-object itself. They further point out that the experience of the subject is mediated, is constitutive of relationships of domination and subordination, and is embedded in its historical context. According to them, it is not enough to include women's voices in the production of knowledge production. It is important to pay attention to the discursive fields in which experiences are articulated. One of the major critiques of postmodern feminism has come from within feminism itself, that this new form of knowledge building seeks to threaten or undermine the success of feminism just when women are beginning to be included in the research process and have been given a voice. Thus, from the above discussions, it can be derived that there is no feminist methodology, but rather there are feminist methodologies. A feminist research projects often derive its methodology from a combination of two or more methodological positions. Therefore, though the different methodologies have been discussed as distinct from each other, there are several areas of overlaps and continuities. In this module on feminist methodology and epistemology, we have discussed about how knowledge is constructed. We have also looked into the various ways in which mainstream knowledge is androcentric. Further, we have also focused on the need to focus on methodology, but also on epistemology, especially in terms of feminist lens. Further, discussing the concepts of reality, truth, epistemology, methodology, feminist androcentrism, positivism and other issues, we have also discussed about how it becomes very important not only to look into the way epistemology is constructed, but also the methodological paradigms. Thank you.